Hello, everyone. It is very good to be with you again today. I'm really glad to see that you guys came back and that are with us. This presentation is gonna address some of the more practical aspects of migration, as well as the pastoral response and the ministerial response. That's some of the things that we will be covering today. But I'm going to start with a legal overview of migration and immigration. And I think that that is a very necessary thing to be informed about. And as a disclaimer, I want to say that what I am covering today with my presentation does not even tap into understanding the immigration system. So instead of actually, I guess, presenting to you everything that you need to know about the immigration system in the United States, I'm giving you an idea of the complexity of the immigration system in this country. Yesterday, when Danny was presenting, he gave us a historical overview. In other words, how did we get from there to what the immigration system is now? And I think that was very helpful to help us comprehend that the laws in a country do not happen in a vacuum, right? They are affected by different events of crisis, different phenomenons, different things that happen in the history of a country that affects the way in which the laws are both created and administrated. It is also important to understand that I think with some of the idea that some of the things that Danny shared with us yesterday, we are not working with a perfect immigration system, right? I think it is I'm stepping here to say something that can be a risky thing to say, but we do not have a just immigration system. And this is not just a biased perspective because of some of my own story that I shared with you yesterday, but it is because it has not always focused on being fair or being just. It has historically, it has been reactionary to crisis, to sociological and historical events, et cetera, et cetera. So some of what we'll be covering today is what are some of the agencies that are involved in the immigration system? What are some of the categories for migrants? And also some of I think to begin with, some of the historical things that have changed in the past 20 years, some of the acts and laws that had come into being within the last decade. There you go. So the agencies involved in the US immigration system are the US Department of State, the Immigration and Custom Enforcement, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, and the Department of Homeland Security. Each of these agencies are in charge of different things. The US Department of State, for example, issues visas, including immigrant and non-immigrant visas. It also releases a monthly bulletin summarizing the availability of immigrant numbers over the calendar month and year. It runs a diversity visa lottery, which randomly selects eligible individuals from among 6 different geographic regions, and it issues visas and non-immigrant visas. It is important to realize that a visa is a permission to enter the United States, but is not necessarily a guarantee that you will be permitted to re-enter or to remain in the United States. The Department of State administers the issuance of visa, but custom officials, which we will see in the next, which I'll cover also, custom officials are in charge of determining who is entering or not entering the country. So let's say, and I'm gonna carry you. I'm trying to explain things with my own experience. I am an international student, which means that I have an international student visa that was issued by the U.S. Department of State. In order for me to get a visa, I have to apply to the U.S. Department of State, fill paperwork with the Department of Homeland Security. And once that visa is approved, then I'll have to go into a port of entry. The U.S. Department of State can issue a visa for me, but that does not guarantee that in the port of entry I'll be allowed to enter the country. So in the port of entry, the official can deny my entrance even if I have a visa. Now we have Immigration and Custom Enforcement. This agency is actually less than 20 years. It was created after 9/11. It is formerly known as U.S. Customs Service, and it was part of another agency. This agency, ICE, also known as ICE, has an investigator, has a relevant investigation and enforcing immigration laws. Some of the different tasks that are done by ICE include identifying removable undocumented immigrants, detaining undocumented immigrants when necessary, and the removal of undocumented immigrants as a whole from the United States. ICE priority is apprehension and removal also of convicted criminals and fugitives who pose a threat to national security. Why is it important to know that this agency was created after 9/11? It is important to know this because after the United States experiencing terrorism, they realized that some of the people who had entered the country had entered with visas. Some of them actually had student visas. So they saw the necessity of creating this agency and upgrading the protocols of security. Another agency that is involved is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. This agency is mainly involved in the process of giving lawful entry to the United States to immigrants from different places. This might be immigrants that are here temporarily because of work visas, student visas, et cetera, or those foreign nationals who are going to go through the process of becoming residents, permanent residents, temporary and permanent residents, and ultimately citizens. And the agency that is overseeing these other agencies, it's known as the Department of Homeland Security. They oversee the U.S., ICE, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol's protection, and the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. You can go to the next slide. There are a few acts and changes that happened after 9/11. In 2002, we have the Enhanced Border Security and Visa Entry Reform Act, which is the act that gave permission to expand budget, staffing, and powers of the immigration enforcement bureaucracy. The same year, we have the Homeland Security Act in 2002. The Homeland Security Act created the Department of Homeland Security by consolidating 22 diverse agencies and boards. The creation of DHS reflected mounting anxieties about immigration in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks of 2001. And then we have the Secure Fence Act in 2006. This law mandated that the Secretary of Homeland Security act quickly to achieve operational control over the U.S. international land and maritime borders, including expansion of existing walls, fences, and surveillance. Next. In the last 10 years, we have seen also a few other changes. I would call these major changes because there are many bills that are passed that have been passed in the last even 2 or 3 years, but they're not considered acts. And there have been a lot of modifications to immigration law within the next year. Some of these modifications don't need the approval of Congress. It can be the agency standing alone and making changes. Some of them need the approval of Congress, the action of the president. So like you were seeing in that first slide where we have like the different agencies that are involved, they all have autonomous decisions. They all have the possibility of make autonomous decisions. But in some cases, they also need to communicate with each other, or they need to pass certain things through Congress and through the House of Representatives. Some of the most, I guess, the major changes that we see during the last decade is the DACA Act, which the proposal of the DACA Act, which try to cope with the long-term residence of millions of unauthorized immigrants who had come as children brought by their parents. And what the DACA Act does is simply giving protection from deportation. Okay, it is necessary that we understand this. It is not giving them a path to citizenship. It is not giving them a visa to exit and enter the country. It is simply allowing them to stay in the country without being deported, without going through the process of deportation. Some of the things that had been, there has been advocacy for in the past years, in the past few years, has been that there would be a pathway to citizenship to DACA recipients. DACA recipients are grew up in the United States. They came here as children, as young as infant years, 5 years, 8 years, 9 years. And they stayed in the country with their parents, grew up in the country, went to school here, etc., etc. It does grant them the opportunity to work in the country and receive education. But the financial aid when receiving education is limited. So, and they have to renew their permits about every 2 years. Now, I have to say this was not just a paper that was given to everybody who was here unauthorized. To obtain a DACA permit, they had to go through background checks and a lot of paperwork, and they have to do that every 2 years. We also have a a travel ban that was imposed by President Trump at the beginning of his administration, and which prohibited not only travel from several countries in the Middle East, but also refugee resettlement. One of these countries was Syria. For about 4 years, the United States could not offer refugee status to people coming from Syria. We go to the next slide. Now I'm gonna give you a few, like I said, for the previous slide, and I was covering some of the major changes. This does not even tap into the changes in the last, let's say, 4 years about asylum seekers, visas, working visas, etc. But it gives you a view of how post 9/11 some of the immigration system has changed. And one of the biggest changes has been the creation of ICE. Now, it is important to differentiate between refugee, asylum seekers, and immigrants. A refugee is a person who has fled the country of origin and is unable and unwilling to return because of a well-founded fear. An asylum seeker is also someone who is seeking international protection from dangers in his home and her home country. However, asylum seekers must apply for protection in the country of destination. So refugees, what happens, for instance, with a lot of Middle Eastern refugees, people coming from countries that are undergoing war, is that they go into, let's say, this haven in Europe, and they don't know where they're going to end. They don't choose to go to a country, or they are not able to go to a country. They don't know where they're going to end, and wherever there's a spot available for them, this spot opens up and they can travel to that country. An asylum seeker, however, is someone who is seeking protection, but they have to be able to arrive to the port of entry on their own or cross a border in order to apply. The people that we're seeing traveling to the southern border would fall into the category of asylum seekers. They are seeking protection in the United States. They present themselves at the border, and they undergo the process of application for asylum. An immigrant, however, is someone who makes a conscious decision to leave her home country and move to a foreign country with the intention of settling there or living there temporarily. They often go through a lengthy process to migrate to a new country, and many become lawful permanent residents or eventually citizens. In this category of immigrant, we have economic migrants, which is they're different from asylum or refugees, but they leave their country because of financial reasons, financial crisis. We also have a lot of people who migrate to other places, not because of fear of being persecuted, but simply because there have been natural disasters in the area they're from, and they are not able to economically survive in their places of origin. Next slide. So we have visas categories. In terms of visa categories, we have non-immigrant visa categories and immigrant visa categories. Non-immigrant visas, the law provides for a variety of categories of aliens that are eligible for visas to enter the United States. And we have immigrant visa categories, which is issued to foreign nationals who intend to live and work permanently in the United States. In most cases, a relative or employer has sponsored them. Non-immigrant visas, for example, I am a student, as I have mentioned. I do not have a immigrant visa. I have a non-immigrant visa. Next slide. To obtain a green card or to become a resident is a quite challenging process. You have to be, you have to fall in one of these categories through family, through employment, through a special immigrant visa, through a refugee or asylum status, a human trafficking or violence victim, through a registry, or through other categories. Something that is quite interesting about the United States immigration system is that they have, believe it or not, they have a number of visas, non-immigrant visas, and visas that are issued within within a year period. So if you are they have a line of priority for who gets the green card or the resident card. You may be eligible to get a green card, but the quota of your country has been met within that year. You will have to wait till there is a space available for you. This can range between 1, 2 to 10 years to 20 years. For instance, if you are the spouse of an American citizen, you might be able to become a resident within the period of 1 to 2 years. If you're the son of or daughter that is a minor of a U.S. citizen, that process may be quicker. But if you are a sister or a brother of a U.S. citizen, this process can go anywhere from 11 to 21 years. Again, you can be qualified, you can qualify to be, to migrate and request a green card, but if your country has met the limit, you will have to wait till there is a spot available. Next slide. So, like I said, the U.S. imposed a limit on how many immigrants from a particular country can receive green cards in a given year. So, if you're from the Philippines or from Mexico, it is a longer way than it is from Germany, for instance. Also, a lot of countries are able to come to the United States for a 90-day period without a visa. But the majority of these countries are European countries. So the question is, why not just becoming a citizen, right? A lot of people ask me this question: why don't you just become a citizen? You would end all of your problems. As a matter of fact, here's my visa. I have a passport. I have a visa. I have a document that grants my state within the United States, etc. And people ask, why don't you just request to become a citizen? Because there is not a pathway. I have been in the United States for over 7 years now, and there is not a way for me to become a green card holder. In order to become a citizen, you have to become a green card holder first, which is a trial period. Unauthorized immigrants cannot become green card holders unless a judge has determined that their green card, that their unless a judge determines that they can abandon the case and stop deportation, then they can give them a green card, which is very strange, like very rare for it to happen. And even then the judge can back from that and say, we're not gonna get you a visa, we're not gonna give you a green card. When unauthorized immigrants do have qualified relatives that could provide a pathway for that visa, but they're still not able to take advantage of this process for years. Now, if someone, in some cases, even if you were, let's say that you extended your visa or you're entered undocumented to the country, in order to go through this process of receiving a green card, you'll have to leave the country. But the moment you leave the country, you are penalized for the time that you were in the country. So for some people, if they have been 6 months in the country, they can go up to 3 years without being unable to come back to the country. For people who have spent more than a year, the wait goes from 5 to 7 years of being unable to come back to the country. So it's not as easy as just go back and wait in line. They'll get a penalty and an amount of years of not being able to come to the country. I'm about to end. Next slide. So this is kind of an overview of some of the basics of the system. Like I said, I'm just tapping into a few things, and now I'm going to give you time for a Q&A.
Juan, I see you raised your hand? Okay, we will unmute you now.
So do we have lawyers? Do we have paralegals? Do we have people who already are working in the field in migration services to do some of to assist some of these people that are requesting asylum, some of these people that are going through a difficult case through the church? Do we have that at the moment, or what is the plan about that?
Do you mean if we have people within the denomination or the church at large?
Maybe you can talk about both, Alejandra, whatever will be your experience.
I meant through our church. Like, let's say that we want to assist one of our church scores, one of our church members. Do we have someone working that can take cases to take difficult cases, or what are we doing? I mean, as far as the church is concerned.
Yeah, I can answer. I can try to answer that question. The short answer is no. That there is not necessarily a system or an office in place that can serve these type of legal needs. I have heard of one person within the Church of God, and I'm forgetting his name, but there is one person who has been known to provide assistance to some people. I think as well, I mean, there's also nonprofit organizations. I know that Carolyn Dirksen works as not as an immigrant lawyer, but as somebody who helps advise people through these types of processes. And she does it with a nonprofit organization that's not affiliated with the denomination. But I mean, part of the work that the Migration Crisis Initiative seeks to do, and maybe one day be able to reach, is to establish these types of resources. And I mean, part of the work that we're doing with the Migration Crisis Initiative is building teams of people within every region of the Church of God that can begin to identify people, if not in the Church of God, in the local communities of reputable, trustworthy, and we're going to talk about this later, nonprofit organizations who do this type of work, immigration consulting. We'll talk a little bit about some of those resources, but I mean, to answer your question, I do not believe there is any type of formal system in place at this moment that can provide that type of assistance to people within the denomination.
Hey, Danny, and maybe, speaking from the Church of God, Juan, I don't know if you part of COG or COGA, but what institution you're representing here. But there's certain levels, like it depends on what kind of work, like work visas for Latinos that are serving under the Church of God. There is a system for that the church has, but not necessarily in the other levels that Alejandra spoken about, refugees or asylum seekers and all that. It depends. If the person is serving the Church of God in certain place outside of the United States and they do that through the church, that would happen. So I think it will be a case by case situation, but not necessarily there's an office just dedicated, for this kind of work. A lot of, I'm speaking from the Hispanic region where I'm part of. I'm not part of the leadership, but I'm part of that region. The bishop has specific contacts, different people that he will use depending on the situation. But a lot of it is done through, nonprofit organizations.
And maybe somebody here on the call may feel inspired to take upon this calling to provide these types of resources to people, either within our denomination or even outside of our denomination. Part of this idea of creating this team of people is so that we can resource our immigrant communities, our immigrant churches. And each and every one of us have different strengths, different callings. Some people may have more experience in the nonprofit sector, or be trained formally as lawyers and can offer themselves as resources. But this is a process that will take time, and it will continue to be a need within our denomination. So thank you for that question. It's a very important one for us to think about.
I'm gonna address quickly the difference again between refugee and asylum seeker. An asylum seeker presents himself or herself in the border. They go to that country where they're seeking asylum and they present themselves. A refugee, usually the process goes through international organizations, such as the United Nations, and they are placed in a country they don't choose to be. Like wherever there's a spot for a refugee, they will be placed in there. That is a difference. So asylum seeker, they present themselves at the country where they're seeking asylum. Refugees are usually put into this haven place organized by international organizations, and then they're given a destination. They do not have a say to where they end. Some people might be sent to Europe, to Germany. Some people might be sent to the United States. Some people might be sent to Eastern Europe, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a ceiling to how many refugees and asylum seekers are admitted on a yearly basis. So once like 5,000, let's say 7,000 refugees are admitted within the year, they'll have to wait to the next year in that haven space that are provided by international organizations.
I believe Catherine had her hand up next, so we'll go ahead and unmute her, and you can go ahead, Catherine. I'll let you know once you're unmuted. Oh, it looks like you're still muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think in the comments, I'm seeing people answering some of what my question is. I realize that US law is preponderous, it's ridiculous. Is there a source or a site dedicated to helping people understand the challenges of US law? You know, I feel like we need immigration law for dummies, because it is, you know, when you look at it, they overlap, they intermingle, they contradict each other. So is there one single place that you can find a good understanding to help immigrants?
So one of my preferred sources is the Migration Policy Institute. It digs deep into explaining some of these issues and also like the different categories, kind of like categorizing things and making it simple. I would be adding a few links and resources in our chat so that you have access to that information. And you can corroborate that information in the US website of immigration. They have a straightforward answers to those questions. What is the process? What are the limitations, etc. I think some of the things that are not seen in the official websites are actually some of the statistics of what happens on a yearly basis, or some of the reasons why people are denied visas, etc., etc. But when it comes to plain information of processes, you can go to the Homeland Security websites, the Department of Defense website, et cetera, et cetera.
And I believe the next person that we had in line was Joel. So if you could, we'll go ahead and unmute you, and then you can ask your question.
Oh, hey guys. So my question, I had typed it in the chat. My question was, is the process to citizenship not an avenue that should be explored based on the hurdles and all the low chances of success? Is that something that we maybe, is that kind of like, because it sounds like it's really, it's a real difficult process. Is it something that's worth like trying to help? Like if somebody, that comes into our community, is that something that we should try to help them do? Or is that something like, well, it's too hard, so, let's just work through it, just figure something else out? I don't know. That was my question.
Yeah. I think if you're asking, like, explore that as a faith community, I think it is definitely necessary to explore it. And part of the answer to your question is going to be addressed within the next sections of pastoral and ministerial response. Because like how many of us do really understand how this system works, right? And how many of us can actually help people in our congregations not feeling like we're limited or our hands are tied. But I think a lot of these steps haven't taken place because we have this view of migration that is very politicized and not humanitarian. And so once we step into this humanitarian view of immigration that is goes in accordance with the principles of scripture that we talked about yesterday, I think we can encourage communities to get involved in the process of helping people. I have seen that within, in my own experience, seeking employment visas, etc. Like the organizations that I move within don't understand not even how to help me get a work visa or get a student visa, etc., because they haven't had to deal with some of these processes. So I think that is a necessity, and also just creating this network where we can invite professionals into our midst that can help with that work. Jewish centers have a good connection with a lot of immigration lawyers. A lot of organizations, Islamic organizations, also have a lot of good connections with lawyers because they do a lot of humanitarian work. But it is kind of difficult to find those things in the church, and that is what we're trying to do with this migration conference.
Great. So I believe that's all the time that we have now for questions. Thank you, everyone, for participating during this time. If you had other questions, please feel free to message them to us, and we'd be more than happy to answer them at a later time.